to our second conversation for today, where we are talking about the 2020 hurricane preparedness for Belize City. And that means we have representatives of the Belize City Council with us. We have joining us via Zoom, Michael Norales, who is the Deputy Mayor and the Councillor responsible for CMO. We have Melanie Dawson, who is the CMO Liaison Officer, and Jermaine Hyde, who is the Traffic Manager for the Belize City Council. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, folks.
And thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks for inviting us.
Okay, so today, June 1st, is day one of the Atlantic hurricane season, and we are getting our first test as of overnight. Let me just start off by asking about the preparations that have been made for the season so far.
Well, we have been modifying and tweaking the City Emergency Management Organization's hurricane plan from when the season closed in November. Mm-hmm. So I have my CMO Liaison Officer here, Melanie Dawson, who's been meeting constantly with the different operation managers, making sure that the plan is able to come in sync with that of the entire CMO, right? So the 13 committees that we have, well, today we have one represented here, Operation Manager, Mr. Jermaine Hyde, who is in charge of transport and evacuation. Mm-hmm. He will talk about that later on. But I'll ask Mel just to tell us a little bit more of what she has been doing for the past few months.
Okay.
Okay, so since the hurricane started and ended last year, we've jumped right into it since January in preparations for this hurricane season 2020. So some stuff that we normally do annually, we would do our shelter inspections. We have started a canned food and toys drive. We have strengthened our tsunami plans because remember, it's not only hurricanes we really target, it's disasters on a whole. We came up with more procedures and alerts. We've revised our hurricane plan, like Deputy noted. We've revised our evacuation routes, and Mr. Hyde will go more in detail with that later on. And we have been in collaborations with other stakeholders to get different training for our employees, such as our shelter managers and so on. So we have been in preparations for the council since the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Let me ask a general question here to either of you guys who would care to respond. We're looking at shelter management at a time where social distancing is very essential. So should we experience any kind of weather system that would prompt us to have to seek refuge at a public shelter, how do we manage in terms of keeping people at the requisite distance when the concept of sheltering is to have as many people as you can seek refuge there?
Okay, so at this point, we are working along with NEMA to come up with a plan with new policies for the shelter. Mm-hmm. For example, like you mentioned, now we have to deal with COVID. So we know that we should have social distancing. So if a shelter should be holding 50 people, just for example, we will only have 25 people in this shelter along with social distancing. Different protocols such as basins for washing hands, soaps, sanitizers will be implemented for the shelter rules for this year.
So if you're going to be spacing out the shelters more, that means you have to identify more shelters to be able to meet the usual demand.
Yes, and that is the next task that we are doing at this current moment. We are now looking for backup shelters.
Okay.
Have you identified them as yet?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
Those backup shelters are not normally publicized simply because they are made up of private dwellings. People who have these big houses and strong houses that we know could withstand a great amount of wind, assist us when it's time. I think earlier Nemo had mentioned that each shelter, now it doesn't necessarily mean that a shelter will have only one room. We would limit it to like 10 people. Mel said 25 just now, but when we started, we had said 10. So as we go along, we confirm with these people, and then when it's time, then we just mention it to the people who are closest to these shelters.
The other issue I'd imagine you have to look at is typically people are asked to come to shelters with their own supplies. We know the economic situation that the country is in, and there may be people who show up at your shelter with not enough to weather a storm. I know the shelter usually has some supplies. Have you taken that into consideration, that some people may be in greater need than they normally are?
That is where our relief and supplies subcommittee comes in. This is where they come out, they go to shelters, and they distribute packages to everyone that is in need of supplies.
Before, I mean like during the hurricane season, or you mean when there is the threat of a storm?
And this is when there is a threat of the storm and people are evacuating to the shelters.
Okay.
Yeah, this is also where one of our biggest stakeholders would come in. Red Cross.
Yeah.
Red Cross, and I think UNICEF as well had suggested that we have packages that can be given out to people of utmost need when it comes to disaster time, right? UNICEF, we could talk about that later on, what these packages would contain, but we will know beforehand who the people are who would need these things, because not everybody necessarily needs all.
So what I'm hearing from you, and just clarify if I'm wrong, that you've already identified a supplier for additional supplies, I think, which includes hygiene and a bit of food for people who may not be able to bring everything to the shelter.
Yes, we have done that.
That's good to know. How else has the pandemic affected planning for this year's hurricane season?
Well, most of our meetings are now virtual. It's extremely necessary. We would in a few of the stakeholders to just sit and talk in a room. Nothing like actually seeing the expression and getting the feeling of what's happening in your neck of the woods. Right? We have people make sure that at least we could contact somebody when a question arises.
Okay, so let's transition to the transport and the route. What are we looking at, Jermaine, this time around? Any new changes?
Okay, well, in looking at the evacuation of the city, there's a possibility that we might have two simultaneous evacuation, because we are also responsible for evacuating the keys.
Yeah.
So what we do, we have a route plan for the residents coming from the keys along the Princess Margaret Drive area that takes them into the Coney Drive and onto the Philip Wilson Highway. While we're evacuating the keys, we also look at the 10 electoral constituencies here in Belize City. If that would have been the easiest route to go in terms of evacuating the city. So we have key points set up in each electoral division so that there is a pickup point for each one where the residents are transported from that pickup point to the relevant shelters in Belmopan.
Again, and I hate to be hammering this point, but even when we're looking at evacuation and we're looking at public transportation, we also have to factor in social distancing.
Social distances.
Because now we'd be looking at persons boarding buses whole families at a time, so to speak, trying to
Yeah.
get out of the city. Right?
So what it has done, it has forced us to look at the availability of these buses and to probably schedule some of our evacuation earlier than we had anticipated, because if we want to evacuate 100 persons, just throwing out a number here,
Yeah.
and we had planned to do possibly 6 trips, right? Because of the number of persons we are now limited in carrying, we might have to do 12 trips instead of 6. So
Yeah.
it might cause us to start the evacuation of the city just a little earlier.
Yeah.
than we actually
Yeah.
anticipated.
But that is also dependent on the cooperation of people, and we know a
Of
big
the
part.
public as well. Yes.
Yeah, and a big
Ex-
part of hurricane preparedness is also educating the communities that are most vulnerable.
Vulnerable.
In looking at assessments for areas that are prone to floods, prone to wind damage, what are you looking at in terms of the situation of city residents?
You mean the education of these people?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have the Education, Information and Communication and Warning Committee. They are responsible to get information out. Well, of course, we have to wait for the information from NEMO.
Yeah.
Right? Because let's not forget, the parent organization is NEMO. What we are doing, we are explaining to people what our role is in the city. That we are not separate from NEMO. I mentioned the Red Cross a while ago. They have gone ahead and trained some community disaster relief, community disaster reduction people within each of these vulnerable areas. They know exactly what they need. They know exactly what happens during any flood or amount of wind that comes in their area. So they are the people who we target to tell us more or less what they need and how we can get them out of those areas.
Let me ask another question here as a follow-up to a thought. What is the financial wherewithal of CIMO at this present moment, given the fact that all around we're facing economic hardships, and so in terms of being able to allocate funds to mobilize when that time comes, where do we stand in terms of our finances?
Well, at the beginning of the year, we had a budget. And normally budget for each department. Now, this is the time when the budget for CIMO kicks in. All right? We have the city administrator who advises us as we go along what we have, what we can do, how we can do it. Right? So when it comes to emergency, this city council definitely make sure that the CIMO will not fall short of anything. If anything happens, then we'll have contingencies for sure.
Certainly.
Now, I want to talk about preparation in terms of infrastructure. Last night we had the rains that people were experiencing in the West finally come over Belize City, and we're already starting to see that the drains are at capacity and that some areas are experiencing slight flooding. What preparation has been put in place to be able to deal with the drainage before we start to see even more rain?
Okay, if you notice, they are doing some work on Orange Street. That's one of the areas that normally holds a lot of water.
Yeah.
We are also cleaning the canals. A few days ago, maybe a week or two ago, when residents were complaining about fish kill in the East Canal area. That's because we had that's from the Ministry of Works, and it's an IDB project to clean the canals. But to clean the canal and to line it properly, you need to get the water out. And they could have done that was to put clay dams and get the water out. But during that time, I think a little rain came and then refilled the canals, of course. So there was a little delay there, and their pumps also decided that it wouldn't work for that weekend. All right. So that's one of the works that we were doing. The city council now, what we are doing, we're going to clear out all the outlets. We start from the outlets and work like reverse to the areas where water will come out from. So once you clean the outlet, then you could work in reverse to make sure. So I think we began that on Saturday, and we'll be continuing that for the rest of this week and onwards.
Yeah.
So definitely we'll be working on the drains as much as possible.
Have you gotten complaints about floods since the overnight rains?
No, but not as yet. But this morning on my way here, when I got to right in front of St. John, and there was a little water there, but I don't think it was that major. Because usually it would have been the whole Farbers Road.
Yeah.
Morning, so I've already sent the manager there to check on what was happening there.
Okay. And looking at other preparations that will have to be made, I know there's a lot of pre-planning that goes into addressing or responding to the threat of a hurricane. Our shelters are usually assessed for how much strength or what strength of a hurricane or system they can handle. How are we doing so far? Do we have up to what category can our shelters withstand?
Our shelters in Belize, City, we are advised that if a hurricane is forecasted to come beyond a category 2, so which means a 3 or above, then we go to Belize City, everybody.
Everybody
Right.
is evacuating
Our
beyond that
shelters are
category 2?
Category 2, yes. So, but you know the forecast, they will tell you, well, it will reach 100 and something miles an hour, and what's it, the miles per hour for winds are, and then we start making plans to get out of the city.
Yeah.
And that's when evacuation will become most important. In
Yes.
addition to public transportation, Jermaine, usually there's a communication about evacuation routes for even people who have private vehicles. Talk to
Yes.
us about disseminating that information.
Well, we have one of our committees that deals with getting the information out there. What we have done in the past is to have these routes and pickup points printed, and we disperse them to the schools and to other public areas. When we have our public forums, we take these brochures out there just so that people can be aware of what, where they'll be able to access the pickup service. Now, in terms of
But there's no school or public event happening.
happening right now, so
Yeah.
we need to take on a campaign, a PR campaign to get this information out there now.
Yeah.
It will be on our Facebook page and any other social media page that we're accessing.
Yeah.
And I think too that we have the routes well demarcated with arrows, showing you where to go
Yeah.
and so on.
So what would you like to tell, just in closing, what would you like to tell city residents about, one, knowing whether it's their shelter, their evacuation route, and also staying up to date with information coming out from CMO?
Well, definitely we will be getting information out there as much as possible, but the key to making this process work is to actually begin the evacuation when we need it to begin. In the past, we've seen a situation where residents have been hesitant to move when we start the evacuation process.
Yeah.
Especially post-COVID now, we have to ensure that when that call comes for us to evacuate, that we do so in a timely manner. We don't want to be placed in a situation where we have to bypass social distancing to get persons to safety as quickly as possible. So compliance with that call to say it is time to evacuate, that is key to ensuring that we actually get a successful evacuation from Belize City to Belmopan.
On my end, I would suggest to the people, and I would implore on them, please make sure that you have your family plan. If you have not gotten ready, please start acquiring supplies, however you can get them. Your family plan is very important. That way, it will be easier for CIMA and the other stakeholders to work with you. All right. So, and of course, stay vigilant and listen to the weather forecasts and the bulletins from NEMO.
Yeah. And the weather forecast is saying that we're going to be getting a lot of rain tonight as well. So if the drainage plan is being put on pause, what's going to happen there?
No, it's not. Well, like I said, that was a week or two ago.
Yeah.
It's ongoing now.
Okay.
We're working as much as we can with the little equipment that we have.
Okay.
We are working.
Okay, good. Melanie, you were going to say?
Yes, I would like to tell the residents of Belize City to just stay alert, visit our Belize City Council website, go through the information that we will be posting. We will be posting information on tips on what to do before, during, and after a hurricane, inclusive of COVID, social distancing, and information about COVID as well. So take advantage of the information, listen to our local stations, and just be vigilant.
All right. And one more thing, just usually the advice for the hurricane season is to clean up your yards, get cut plants and whatnot, and then the city council will go around and pick up whatever you remove. Is that something that's ongoing? Do people contact you if they need to have the streets cleared, the debris cleared?
Oh yes, that has been ongoing. I think that's one of the programs that we were doing, especially during the COVID crisis here in Belize.
Okay.
We've been doing that. But of course, in some areas, as soon as you move it, some more affairs. So we are dealing with it as much as possible, as urgently as possible, and as, well, we are dealing with it. We are dealing with it.
All right. Thank you very much. I know this was just a quick check-in at the start of the season. And of course, we look forward to having further conversations with you as well. Do stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we are going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, the conversation continues as we talk about the commemoration of Fisherfolk Month. So please stay tuned.